Hello, I'm Adrian. Welcome to the CIPD Middle East podcast. This is the place where we explore some of the most pressing issues in the region with some of the people that are directly involved in them. Today is a little different though. We have a slightly different episode. We welcome Peter Cheese, our chief executive for the last 12 years. Is that right?
Coming up 14.
Coming up 14.
Yeah.
My maths was never a strong point, so apologies for that. Peter's been a long-time advocate, long-time supporter, not just with the CIPD, but 30 years with Accenture before that. So has been in and around the region for longer than most of us, I would say. So, and we're also coming at a quite a unique time in your career. Is that right?
It is.
Tell us about that.
Well, I announced a couple of months ago my retirement from the CIPD. As I said, it's coming up 14 years, which I think is a pretty good innings.
Absolutely.
It's been an extraordinary time. It's been an incredible privilege to do the role. But at some point, one has to move on. What I'm looking forward to, though, is to continue to work within and around the profession, to advocate for the profession, through non-exec roles, teaching, writing, things of that nature. So I'm not disappearing. I think I still have a lot of energy and a lot of passion for the world of work.
Is that a promise or a threat?
Well, it could be either.
A
little bit of both. I mean, I enjoyed challenging as
Sure.
much as supporting, and I think we all do need to look at this time as an incredibly important time in the world of work and what we individually and collectively can do to make sure we're shaping a positive future of work.
Absolutely. So at this period, how does it feel? We're 40 plus years around this profession. What does it feel like?
It feels like we're obviously in a time of great change, but I think that's characterized our careers. I mean, it's not that previous generations haven't experienced change. They experienced some extraordinary things, which we've been fortunate not to have to live through.
Sure.
But we've certainly seen more change, I think, in the nature of the work that we do, how we work, how organizations function. And obviously things like technology have had a massive impact, but I also spent a lot of my time in Accenture was working around the world with many different organizations, looking at operating models and organization strategies that embraced, if you will, a world that seemed to be opening up and what we used to call globalizing.
Yeah.
So we were distributing supply chains and looking at markets, not just from the perspective of what I could sell into that market or what I could buy from that market, but what talent I could acquire from that market.
Right.
And what used to be talked about as sort of free movement of goods, labor and services.
Sure.
And that was a world that, I spent a lot of my career in. And then in the recent years, in the last 10, 15 years, of course, things have changed in a slightly different direction. So as I look back over the 40 years, it's been a time of, as I said, extraordinary change. But I think in all truth, we have a lot to do still where we stand now to ensure that we are creating, as I said, good work, fair opportunities for all, inclusive cultures, environments that help get the best out of people. And also support their well-being. And I think these are really critical goals that we need to make sure we're focused on for the future.
As high-level headings, if we like, every one of those I think is going to resonate. But as we're here, we're celebrating 10 years of the CIPD in the region. One part of globalization that keeps coming back to the table is not just the goods, services, and transfer of money across borders, but how we do things. What are those operating cultures? And how globalized are we really? So what's been your observations around the Middle East over that period?
I mean, the Middle East, obviously, during that period has seen extraordinary growth and continues to see extraordinary growth. I mean, the first time I was in Dubai, whatever it was, 20, 25 years ago, it was a vision.
A few more cranes, I'm guessing?
A lot more cranes. It did feel like a very large building site.
Yeah.
But what struck me, and I think strikes everybody about Dubai, is the incredible vision that Sheikh Mohammed had for the city and becoming,
Absolutely.
and I think he was the one to coin this construct of a global city. And
Yep.
now there are other cities around the world that have developed very fast and would probably position themselves in a similar sort of way. But I think there's something fairly unique about the Middle East in terms of its rapid growth. And of course, the huge influx of overseas talent and people to the region.
Absolutely.
To help with that growth. And that is certainly one of the characteristics of this region, which makes it, I think, a little bit different from many others.
Very much so. I think we've both seen the generations of professionals coming in. As I came in to a similar time, 25 years ago, there was the end of an era of expatriates that came in because there was no local talent at that time. There was nobody who'd had the education or the technical build-up. And of course, 25 years later, that's changed beyond all recognition. We have some of the strongest talent on the planet right here now.
Yes, and I think that's been a fascinating part of, we used to talk about the developed world and the less developed world and things like that. I think so much of that has changed. I think that if I look back 20, 30 years ago, businesses were talking about how we could outsource things to, say, the Middle East or Asia because it was far cheaper. And I remember at Accenture, we started to talk about not a sort of two-state world, but a multipolar world, where in other words, you could look at any country, any city, or any company, which could be based anywhere and operating on a global basis. I remember going to India and China and places like that, where they were saying quite clearly that they didn't want to see themselves as the cheap factories for the rest of the world. They wanted to be able to get there to compete on similar terms. So to innovate and create, and of course, so much that comes from education. I think one of the standout examples of that is a country like Korea. So post the 1950s and the Korean War, South Korea invested massively in education because they realized by developing the talent for the future, that would help create a good future for everyone. And I think that's, as you pointed out, I think it's true of the Middle East too.
Absolutely. But that link between, so the education, we can sit with all of our education leaders here and do regularly and go, what's the purpose of education in this society? Because the joy of education for the sake of education is somewhat lost in the factories that are turning out white-collar and blue-collar labor for the industries that we're growing. Now, do you think that education's got the same role here that it does perhaps in the UK or somewhere else? Or is it somewhat different?
It's an interesting thing. I've spoken in schools and universities, colleges, spoken to many educationists over my time, because helping education to understand what are they preparing young people for is really important. And I think on the one hand, I think many businesses feel at the moment, indeed, that education is not always helping to prepare young people for the future of work. But then you talk to educationalists, and of course, and I fully acknowledge this, that education is not just about preparing people for the world of work. It is encouraging their learning and their thinking and how they find their talents and things of that nature. But ultimately, that will get expressed through what they do and the jobs and work that they do.
Absolutely.
I think the challenge we have now with education, perhaps more than we've ever had, is several things. One, that the nature of jobs that people will do in the future is far less clear to determine.
What are we preparing for?
What are we preparing for?
Yeah, it's a mystery, really.
And we know that particularly with technology and artificial intelligence, that the nature of work will change faster and faster. People now talk about, it used to be, in my day, it was a sort of job for life, and then it became a life of jobs, and now we talk about squiggly careers.
I love that phrase.
I
love that phrase.
It's an interesting way to sort of visualize how future careers will look. But so how do we prepare people for that world? I think still too much of the educational system is determined on qualification and hitting certain academic standards, which of itself is not necessarily bad discipline. But if that is done to the exclusion of the development of individuals in the more rounded sense of giving them the skills for the future, which a lot, incidentally, and I see businesses everywhere, and I talk about this a lot, they're the much more, if you will, human skills, the ability to collaborate and communicate effectively, the ability to learn, to have curiosity, to think critically. These are the attributes that I think more and more we're looking for in business, because we don't know all the jobs, and we've got to be good in business and building the job skills. And I've always acknowledged that, because sometimes with education, they say it's not our job in education to build the job skills. And I say, no, I acknowledge that. But I think it should be to build the foundations of skills and capabilities which will serve people in the world of work, particularly as it changes. And interestingly, there are also life skills. There's not a big difference between the skills I just called out and what you would say will help make people happy and successful in their life in general anyway.
And I think that's one element that's crucial in this region, because the difference between work and life is far more blurred here. We only have to go have coffee in one of the big family groups, and you can see, where does life and work, there's no boundary. We can't quite see it. And it's not in a negative way. It's just, this is everything that happens in my life. And I take care of it when it's most relevant, most important. There was a lovely gathering down in Knowledge Village here, one of the two main academic centres. There was exactly this. It was industry leaders and educational leaders coming together to point fingers at each other and going, look, you're not preparing the right people with the right skills, and we're not linked in this way. But the common ground was absolutely there. It's like, we're not quite sure. The employers are not quite sure what they need now. Why haven't you got it ready? Well, we weren't talking 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. Can we talk now for 6, 7, 8, 9 years in the future? No, we can't, because we don't know what we're going to need. So it's a point of the life skills, the ability to support, influence, and navigate whatever might be coming may be the piece of it. But if we bring it back into the kind of now, most of the senior chartered fellows and more experienced members that might be watching this, they're not necessarily working with HR so much. They're working with other leaders of the CEOs, board advisories, C-suite members. And we're seeing in the Middle East more and more critique of the people profession. And it's not brutal. It's not, oh my gosh, what value do you add? What's the point of view? It's just less tolerance for HR constructed processes.
Yes.
And if we take an example of performance management as an example, the shadow systems that exist in most of the organizations as we drive along this road, that are the real performance management, where we really manage performance, and that's not the HR version of it. How do we feel about that? What are you hearing from other HR leaders about this?
Yeah, I think there are a number of things going on. I mean, part of the argument is that has HR just got bigger and bigger and therefore controlling more and more aspects, and that word control does come up. Controlling more and more aspects of organizations and how people should behave, and writing rules all the time. And I think, to be fair, there's always, there's no smoke without fire. So there is some of what we've done, I think, historically, has to think that what we've got to do is write the rules that control things, as opposed to thinking about what to do to enable good performance, what do we do to enable business outcomes and productivity. So there is some, as I said, I think some background to that, which acknowledges the fact that we haven't always been good enough as a profession in articulating the outcome of why we do the things we do, and what outcome and what difference is this going to make to business, and of course the people within it. Because ultimately our role is to help to develop and nurture the people within an organization, find the right skills and talent, help them to thrive, and all that word means, so that they can deliver of their best for the organization.
Right.
So I think that's one aspect of it, as I say, linked to the idea that the scope of what we do in HR has expanded. I mean, even in my time in the CIPD, I mean, subjects like mental health and well-being, which we've already touched on, and we may well come back to, has grown enormously in people's sort of thinking, and then other things like culture and understanding conflict in the workplace, or how we deal with different attitudes and generations, which are all linked into things like culture as well. And frankly, to go back to the earlier part of our conversation, how do we develop the skills in very different ways than we've done in the past? We need to reinvent learning. We need to think of learning as a strategic capability. So I think some of those challenges to the profession, therefore, are very much in our hands to fix. I think on the positive side, business leaders are finding themselves drawn more and more into our world. If you ask most business leaders, you look at most business surveys, they will talk about very high on the list will be things like, can I get the right skills and capabilities I need to help drive the strategy? Are my leadership competencies and capabilities where they need to be? How do I think strategically about the workforce and those elements of my business strategy, without which I'm frankly building a strategy on sand if I don't understand what capabilities I'm going to need and when I'm going to get them, or how I get them, then that is, of course, going to compromise my strategy. And then coming back to cultures, that good old saying, I think Peter Drucker came up with it, that culture can eat strategy for breakfast. So I think on the positive side, as we have got perhaps bigger and more influential as a function, it's not all bad. It's not all about control, but it should be focused, and we should be clear on our articulation of this as to how does this drive positive business outcomes and value.
Sure. Lovely responses. And there's 16 hours of content that we can unpick there for sure. I'm trying to link strongly into this region, and I think there's a few different flavors of organization here that are super relevant. Some of them are the what does it take to run a country? The national infrastructure, heavy industry sectors with massive numbers of blue collar workers. And we've seen some changes there. HR tended to have more of a relationship with the white collar management and leadership of those organizations. And more recently, we've seen some roles created which are really engaging much stronger with the mass workforces. Now, if we look back to where that came from in the UK, where we were very much personnel and looking after the masses, a management function, not really a leadership function in the early days. How do you feel that comparison sits between what would be a multi-generational market and where we are right now?
Yeah.
And there's other sectors I'll come back to, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's another sort of feature of understanding the different parts of our workforces and how we need to support them. I've always been a believer that good people management practice is universal. And that would apply, across generations. It would apply to different countries. It would apply to different segments of the workforce. But you're right. In this part of the world, where there's been massive growth, there's been a large influx of foreign workers to support that growth, all the way, as you said, from white-collar work through to construction and many other jobs, and building the infrastructure that the country needs. How we manage that workforce is really important. And you're right. I think a lot of HR focus has tended in recent years to focus more on the white-collar workforce. I think where you see many of the challenges and stresses and strains in work, it often is those people who are in the lower paid jobs or lower skilled jobs. They're out on sites. We can't always manage them in the way that we would manage people in offices. They can be treated unfairly. There are health and safety issues, well-being issues. And interestingly, when you look at sectors like construction, it has some of the worst records in terms of mental health and well-being.
Absolutely.
And indeed, other sectors you could point to, like agriculture and places like that. So if we believe, as I do, that a fundamental role of HR is to help, as I said, people to thrive, that work should be good for us and all that means, and certainly good in terms of an outcome of well-being, then we have to better understand those segments of the workforce that do so often find themselves compromised, treated unfairly. They don't have the backup and support of HR and perhaps the ways that people working in offices do. That probably leads us into things like unions. I mean, it's been really interesting to see back in Europe and in many countries the growth of unions again, because a lot of the unions also lost traction, particularly in those countries like the United Kingdom, where manufacturing and some of these more, if you will, blue-collar jobs were starting to disappear. Unions play a role in some of that as well, helping to protect or certainly understand the issues that are often rather missed or forgotten about in those segments of the workforce that are less visible to us.
And we've seen comparison in this region. So we've got, some small pockets where some level of collective representation has been legal, has been allowed and then promoted. But of course, they're coming to it without a labour movement. There's not a generations of labour movement. But we've seen how there's been some interesting lessons about how that's changed the dynamic into it. Now, when we move into the large-scale, high ratio, Emiratized, Saudiized, Qatarized sectors, we're seeing quite significant changes in how that's working. These are no longer social employers. Right? They're there for a hard reason. They have to wash their face. They have to be absolutely viable. So what's being tolerated, and we talk about culture, and I think there's a feeling that we're getting the culture not that we aspire to, but the one that we tolerate in that. If people are not bringing it and not contributing, the only way to maintain that is to exit some people who are not going to deliver and maintain those standards. But it's a next generation approach. The grandfathers and the maybe not working in the same way as this generation are. What advice would you have for the young Emiratis coming through then, and Qataris and Saudis, that might be coming into HR leadership roles?
I think the main advice I would have is to learn. I mean, I think a lot of the discussion that's going on, particularly in places like Saudi Arabia, as you know, is that nationalisation programs mean that we shouldn't just forever be dependent on expats and all of their skills and capabilities.
Absolutely.
We need to transfer that knowledge and therefore give the locals more opportunity. This part of the world is fairly unique, particularly in the Gulf countries, in terms of the mix, the proportion of expats versus locals. And that has, as you said, over time created a particular dynamic. But from the individual perspective, I would say to the locals, seek those opportunities. learn from the expats. And we do need people, of course, and it's true in every country in the world, that you want to see the locals, having the opportunities and thriving, just as much as you'd say, well, okay, if we need expats, which is clearly we do in very fast growth countries, then what can we learn from them? And how do we, of course, then create cultures that work for everybody? And culture is such an interesting debate in all of this, but that's what I would say to young people everywhere. Seek to learn, be curious,
absolutely,
think critically about where you're going, and also often say to young people, don't panic, because I think there is a worry that many young people have, that if I haven't figured out my career early on, then where am I going?
Sure.
As we've already explored, squiggly careers mean that your career may take you in all sorts of directions.
Yeah.
So seek those opportunities, learn from others, find your ways of navigating your own interests and talents that help you get to the place that you want to get to.
And I think you're role modeling that, and we're gentlemen of a certain age.
Yeah.
And here we are, squiggly careers, right? Here we are pivoting from one thing to another. And I think that's the reality. Across the region here, though, we've got some quite different dynamics. Very small ratios in areas like Qatar and here in the UAE. So there's an ongoing reliance of expatriate labour. And then we've got Oman, we've got the young population in Saudi, huge numbers of people coming through that need to figure out their career paths, figure out their education, find a place. But those numbers are there, the volumes are there. So the HR need is quite different across that. It's not one Middle East need at all.
Yeah.
There's a big pitch shift. So the other sector that we see a lot of then, as you've driven down Sheikh Zayed Road today, is all of those well-known Asian and Western names on those big buildings on the side. The truth is they're usually one office with about 60 people inside. They're not usually as big as the name might suggest. And some of those leaders might be some of the most critical to say, look, what's it? HR's getting in my way here. These systems, these processes, my BPs tell me they're too busy to do the things I really need them to do because they're too busy executing the HR systems. So when we speak to those leaders, what advice should we give to them? How do they support or grow the HR in their businesses?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at HR as it's fundamental to how you support and bring on the right talent and develop them and so forth. So HR is part of any business. It may not be called that. It may not even have a function that has a label on the door that says they're HR. But the fact is, any business, and we've done some research in the CIPD looking at how businesses evolve from very tiny to micro to mid-size and so forth. And you start to see, of course, as businesses evolve and grow, initially, maybe you start off with you and a few mates or family, and you don't have to think about recruitment process or anything like that because you're just working with people you know. Then, of course, you get to the point where you've got to start to recruit people. Well, that may be the first point that business leaders start saying, so there is some kind of HR.
It's getting a bit real now.
It's getting a bit real now. And there is some kind of HR process I have to go through. How do I advertise the role? How do I make sure that however I'm recruiting somebody is fair and open, and recognizing that, of course, there's legislation that protects on some of these things.
Sure.
And then you begin to sort of scale up from that a bit, and then you start to think about, well, okay, what training do I need to provide? How do I do that? How do I understand performance, as we already touched on? And my experience of working directly with small businesses, because they do need support a lot of times, because what's interesting to me, many entrepreneurs, particularly in today's world, will start a business without necessarily having had much business experience themselves.
Absolutely.
And indeed, many young people, when you ask them what they expect to do in these squiggly careers of the future, many of them say, well, I don't want to work for a big corporate. I want to be my own boss, and I want to start something myself. And good luck to them. I think it's an important part of the economy. But they do need help. Because they can often trip over things that they're not necessarily aware of. And so, for example, we see a higher proportion of tribunal cases coming from smaller businesses on a proportional basis than larger ones. And it's not because they're bad people, it's just because they're tripping over things they don't necessarily understand.
Absolutely.
So how do we provide some of that support? I think it should be integral, interestingly, to any kind of business management training. I mean, I often talk on things like exec ed or MBA programs, and I say, how much that you taught about things like understanding culture or basic people management processes or some of the things around employment law? And the answer is very little. They talk about marketing, they talk about strategy, they'll talk about financial stuff.
Read a P&L, but not read your people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And yet, as I've already touched on, when you talk to business leaders today, what's most on their mind? And it will be about things like culture and people and behaviors and skills and capabilities. So as I said, I mean, that applies to small businesses as well. And therefore, where do they get some of that support? And I think, interestingly, both in the educational system, and just to come back and touch on that briefly, I think the ways in which business work with education have really got to change. Because it's not just about education. When I'm 21, 22, I'm done. It's lifelong. And businesses do need to be working with education more closely and on some of these aspects of work as well. So I think it's as we're observing, it's important for every business to see that HR, and whatever you call it, is integral to business, because people are integral to business. How we manage and understand them and support them and recruit them effectively and make sure that we're not discriminating or understand conflicts in the workplace are absolutely fundamental business imperatives.
Sure.
Now, we as a profession, and it's not unique to HR, will sometimes make that all sound rather complicated and put lots of processes in place, as we've already said. But they are fundamental attributes of any business.
Absolutely. And we've had a few leaders that have reported applying the same standards to HR that they do to every other area. And the fact that that's even been brought to the table, I find, is interesting. So the example that was given was if their COO was coming to the board to look for finance for a new piece of equipment, a new machine, it was going to be 15 million. And they said, I don't really know what it's going to do. I'm not sure what the return on investment would be. I think it'll be a good idea. And we're not going to pilot, we're not going to test, we're just going to roll this out. I'm just going to change my production line. It would probably be career ending.
Yeah.
But they said, I hear that from my CHRO quite regularly. We're going to roll out an initiative. It's probably going to be 50 million over 3 years. So Chaz, leadership coaching. I think it's a good idea, but I don't know. I'm going to put all of our C-2s through MBAs. I'm not quite sure what. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I said, look, we're not being hard on HR. It's just we're going to put the same objectives and key results in place that we would do for our CFO, for our COO, and we're going to hold to the same account. And there was a sharp intake of breath that that's not the way we're used to be treated. How do you feel about it?
Well, I think, first of all, yes, every business function should be capable of expressing the business rationale and the outcome. And as we've already explored, I think some of the challenges that we have seen for the profession over the years, and certainly comes even more strongly when we're in tougher economic times, as we are in many parts of the world. Can you demonstrate the value and the outcome? Do you understand the outcome that you're trying to create?
Or at least why you're doing it.
Yeah,
in the first
exactly.
place.
Why are you doing it in the first place?
The desirable goal. Yeah.
So it is important, and certainly at the very heart of our teaching as the CIPD, and indeed it sits right at the very heart of what we call the profession map, which describes the skills and capabilities of people across the profession, sits this idea of basic understanding of business, basic understanding of things like cost and finance, so that you can create the business cases, to your point, and articulate the arguments as to why whatever you're doing will drive a positive business outcome.
Speak the same vocabulary, have the same language.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, how many years have we talked about, does HR speak the language of business? And I've often said, there's no great surprise in this, but the language of business is largely the language of numbers.
Absolutely.
Now, with that said, I think when I talk to business leaders about some of these things, you're right, they are looking for the kind of things that you described. But also, we all need to understand in business that not everything can be written down on a spreadsheet. The life and human behavior and culture and many of the dynamics of business are qualitative as much as they are quantitative.
Sure.
So if I take as an example culture, which we touched on a little bit already, you can't measure culture on, it's 4 out of 5 on a 5-point scale, and there it is in my spreadsheet. So to some degree, we also have to work with leaders to say, look, this initiative, say leadership development, we think is fundamental because we're trying to address things like how leaders get the best out of their people, how we live our values effectively, how we reduce conflict, how we reduce stress in the workplace. These are absolutely fundamental things. And those are drivers of business outcomes. Now, can I say that X plus Y equals Z? Absolutely, clearly. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
But we can certainly say that these are the kind of attributes that we are looking to create, or the difference we're trying to create. And we will build some measures, some of which may well be qualitative in understanding those outcomes.
Yeah.
So to me, it has to work from both sides. HR's got to get better at some of these things without doubt. But I do think, and if you think that certainly historically it used to be true that, I think it's still largely true, that something like 2/3 of CEOs are from the finance side of business.
Yeah.
So they will tend to look at the world very much from a numbers perspective. That they also do need to understand that there are some things about business which are more qualitative, and they've got to lean into that idea. I often find it interesting when I talk to very analytical businesses, engineering companies, for example, and HR people arguing the point you made even more so. So I can't get these cases, I can't get them to understand. Well, you have to start with evidence and data.
Sure.
And I think it's true in every context, but particularly those organizations which are very data-driven anyway.
Yeah.
So the other thing that's at the heart of the profession, Matt, which captures, I think, a lot of what we've talked about, is the idea of being principles-led. So what do we believe in as a profession? What's important? So, for example, inclusion. Second is to be evidence-based. So what is our evidence that says we understand where we are and what interventions are going to make a difference, and therefore what we can point to in terms of outcomes? And that is the third part of it. So evidence-based, outcomes-driven, principles-led, evidence-based, and outcomes-driven.
Absolutely.
And that is a mantra that sits at the very heart of our thinking, which I think encapsulates a lot of what we talked about.
Yeah, and we've heard this from you, advocated for a long time. I think it's permeated. I think the concept is landing. I think it absolutely is. And one positive thing I think that's come from, like you say, finance background CEOs that we've been speaking to recently, is that they're not looking to HR to ring fence an outcome. As an enabling function, they're looking to HR, to their people function, to support a business outcome.
Yeah.
And that might be reduction of conflict between, it might be connecting their teams so the system and the workflow is working in a better way. But that's not sitting entirely on a BP's shoulders. It's sitting, but they are absolutely part of that team that will make that happen. And if they're not there, that could be a problem. And we certainly have a sense that in this region, if it's a topic, it's allocated to the CHRO. It's 100% your deliverable.
Yeah.
That's not fair.
Come
on, that's not fair.
No, because I think it wouldn't be fair of any function.
Absolutely.
I mean, to go back to your point about some of the criticism or challenges that HR's faced, I've heard people saying that HR is somehow responsible for the entire productivity problem that we have. You think
interesting,
which is interesting because it wasn't long ago. Or the other argument is that HR has no value. So which is it? We're either adding no value or entirely responsible for productivity. And of course, everything lies somewhere between the two.
Right.
So absolutely to your point, yes, HR should understand things like productivity, but we're not going to drive productivity on our own. HR has got to be working with the business to understand what are some of the things that will improve productivity. Yeah. And that does begin with things like the design of work that we have today, and particularly how we're using technology and automation. It does include also things like, are people clear on their accountabilities and what they're responsible for, and how do those things all connect? And also, as we've already discussed, the responsibility for helping leaders to be effective people managers. But those aren't just what HR does. HR should enable some of those things, but be working with the business so that we all come together in order to deliver those outcomes.
Absolutely.
So it's because it's a truism of life, isn't it? And most problems we're dealing with are multidimensional. And I think that the challenge that many leaders face today is in a more complex world, the more you see that there is an interaction of things that need to come together. And therefore you go back to some of the essential skills that we were talking about. One of the things that is talked about quite a lot is systems thinking, the ability to think systemically. It's not just about one thing is going to solve all of this. It's about how do a number of things come together. And I think HR arguably sits in a sort of fairly unique position in being able to look at an organization from these different aspects.
Across all boundaries.
Across the boundaries, understand things, as we've said, things like culture and behavior, just as much as they're trying to understand the jobs that people do and the skills that people need. And how does that all come together? And then working with leaders to help them understand those things as well. So I think HR has an educational role, as I said before, help educate leaders on how they need to work effectively to deliver the right outcomes, help them understand, as I said, the more qualitative side and behavioral side of organizations just as much as they understand the quantitative, and work together on the interventions that are going to make the difference.
I mean, literally, that was linking into a point that is a recent critique that we've heard in this region. That is, as we pivot a little bit from the curse of competence and now into skills-based role architectures, the focus and the critique that's coming back from senior leaders that fully agree with your point, that we don't get results from individual performance, we get them from collective systems and workflows. That's why we're structured in the way that we've structured an organization. It's why we've got the teams that we have, why they're connected in the way that they are. So to get those outcomes, they need to be connected. But the HR lens tends to be quite individual. Tends to be individual skills, competencies, tends to be individual performance, tends to be individual careers. How do we feel about, this maybe linking into the last sort of questions, what does this leave for your successor, the person that's going to come into your chair? Is that something they're going to have to pick up and run with? Do you think it's already on the rails? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like so many things, everything can be reduced to a normal distribution curve ultimately, can't it? So one end of the spectrum, definitely got organizations, as you said, skills-based organizations, and thinking about capabilities in very different ways, and recognizing capability is not just about an individual skill, it's about how that applies into the workplace and the job and the role, how it works with others, collaborative effort that creates outcome. I think we are seeing a genuine shift in that direction from many, but on the other end of the spectrum, yes, it's too much. It's again about this sort of idea of system thing. How do the individual interventions also help me to drive an overall business outcome? I think it also links to, again, one of the challenges that the profession has faced in the past is that HR itself can be too siloed, not just as a function, interestingly, but within HR. So, when I talk about systems thinking, it applies to what we do in HR.
Yeah, the COE separated out from the
exactly,
BPs
things like that. So ultimately, the so-called talent management cycle, hire to fire, if you will, all needs to work together. So if I take an example of inclusion, I can't just have a really inclusive recruitment process and they land in the organization and they're in an environment and a culture which is not supporting inclusion. So we have to fix our own home in some ways in terms of our ability as HR professionals to understand, yes, of course I need specialisms, but it's how do those things work together in concert to deliver the wider outcomes? And then beyond the profession itself, how do we work, as we've already said, across the business? And I've always said that I think that the boundaries of HR, if you will, need to be much more fungible. It's fungible in the sense that everybody has a responsibility for HR. Ultimately, we're all people managers. So many aspects of what I said before is not just what you put on as a label as HR. I mean, they are good people management, which should be understood by all. But it's also this ability to think of people coming in and out of the function. I've often found some of the strongest advocates for HR can be those people who worked in business, then come into a senior role in HR.
Absolutely.
And it fascinates me because they may have been harsh critics of HR in the past and not necessarily understood everything that we do, which is my point about educating business leaders about what we do. And then they come into HR and say, wow, I get this. This is really strategic if we think about this properly. So that point about being more fungible says, people should move in and out of functions much more. And if we're going to create that sort of ability of leaders to think holistically and systemically, we need to give them exposure to more functions. And I've seen businesses that have thought about that, and then HR's been out there on its own. So they've moved them between, engineering and logistics and supply chain roles, or moved them into finance and out into marketing. And think, well, they should be in HR as well. This is a fundamental core understanding for any effective business. So as I said, I think when you look at it today and where we're headed, and if I go back to that analogy of a normal distribution curve, I think in the last 10, 15 years, we have seen a shift in a positive direction of that normal distribution curve. I think we're seeing many HR professionals genuinely operating much more strategically. They have this proverbial seat at the table. They are understanding outcomes, and we haven't talked a lot about technology, and perhaps that'd be a good area to close on. But they are leaning into the opportunities that technology, and particularly around artificial intelligence, can drive for the future, and the role of the profession is shaping that future.
Sure.
But at the other end of the spectrum, yes, there are still many, many organizations where HR is relegated and sits in this box, which is partly of its own making, and partly also because that's how businesses perceive HR, is in this control function. It's writing policies, and it's very transactional, and you will still see an awful lot of that. But as I said, I think the median, if you will, of that normal distribution curve has moved to the right, but we still have a lot of work to do, and I profoundly believe that part of that work is, yes, we got to improve our professionalism as a profession, which is, after all, what the CIPD stands for. And I might come back and just elaborate a little bit on what that means, but to treat ourselves as a profession, to invest in ourselves properly. I've said for years that part of the challenge of our profession is we've been the cobbler's children, which, the shoemaker's children don't have the shoes.
Yeah.
We've worried about everybody else's skills and capabilities. We haven't done enough for ourselves. So we need, I said before, it's partly in our hands. So partly of that is investing in ourselves so that we can have the confidence, capability, and credibility to drive the kind of agendas that we've been describing, but at the same time educate business leaders of the role of a strategic HR capability, which in my view every business needs.
Look, that's a wonderful overview, and as I zoom down to people who would maybe join in my level 5 qualification class that I teach on a Saturday, those early career people, cobbler's children, they'd be happy with an old pair of Crocs. They'd be they're there to do transactional execution work, and that definition of an enabling function, if their leadership has just given the business what they've asked for, that's where they've ended up being. And even the HRDs and CHROs, many of those have ended up being PA to the C-suite.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an equal member of the C-suite, but really a personal assistant to the C-suite. Being a business partner, running business partner errands for the other chiefs at that table, rather than being a chief in their own right. And some of that is being leveled at the fact that if we've got generalists that have ended up in those roles that don't have that deep expertise, that deep credibility at the table, and they have to run off to COEs to try and build out something, which they probably go to RFP and bring out Accenture or to somebody to do it for them, that's not helping.
No.
That's not helping, having that counsel, that credibility go, I'm the person to go and have that conversation with. And we see a big difference between those that they are sought out to have those conversations and those that are just brought in to execute.
I think that is still certainly true. So I'd use that sort of phrase of building the confidence, credibility, and capability of the profession. And that starts all the way from the range of people that we recruit into the function and help to build their skills and help them to realize what I see as a huge opportunity for the profession to truly make a difference to the world of work. There are many things in the world of work that do need to change, and we have such a profound role in that, which is, I think, incredibly exciting. And when I talk to young people about the profession, I talk about that sort of vision, the role that we have in shaping a better future of work that is good for individuals, is good for organizations, is good for the economy, and it's good for society. I mean, that's a massive mission and purpose.
That's just a little bit to get your teeth into.
It is. It's
just
fantastic. It's fantastic, which is why I advocate so strongly for the profession. But absolutely, we've got to have that confidence. We've got to invest in ourselves more. We've got to attract, a wider range of talent into the profession. I mean, things like people with really good analytical backgrounds, finance and cost management, things like that. Those sorts of skills we've talked about. But also increasingly, of course, an awareness of technology. Now, technology will shape the future of work. It's probably the other forces going on around us for sure, but it will have a very profound effect. And we as a profession need to be in the room to help to shape that future. The thing that I find exciting is that I talk a lot to technology people. It's sort of ingrained in me anyway, given my background. Technology, working with people together, and this is our future. This is our role for the future. I think is how do we make sure that how people come together with technology gets the best out of both.
Absolutely.
And so we have that opportunity to shape that. So we do need people who can come in and look at other areas of HR which haven't been such a strong part of what we do. So, for example, designing jobs, understanding processes, making sure that the job that we're creating for the human being is, as I said, getting the best out of people. How we create organizational structures and operating models that are agile and responsive to the needs of business as that is rapidly changing. How do we create cultures and leadership and things like that? And strategic workforce planning. Those are the really value-adding parts of HR. Yes, of course, like any function, we need to do the transactional stuff well and efficiently.
Yep.
And again, technology can help us with that. I mean, interestingly, to go back to some of the questions raised about HR, some people have said because they put HR in that box of just doing transactional and admin stuff and say, well, if AI could do a lot of that, then do we need HR?
Yeah.
Well, if that's all we were doing, then arguably you wouldn't.
That would be the argument. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, as time is against us, and as we move to these areas, in the last couple of organizations I've supported, we've gone and hired a data scientist. We've gone and hired different skill set, but we've also faced CHROs, really good CHROs, by the way, really good, genuinely going, I don't know how to manage them. I don't know what to ask for. What should my wish list be? Yeah. And the starting point has tended to be more dashboards, which we want to, and then we've got these data scientists ripping out dashboards and replacing them with early warning systems and getting you actually running like fintech would run in this sector. So helping those leaders to go, look, you can have some new skills, and it's okay if on day one you don't know the answer to that. And that brings us to the coffee conversation, which is we've had several technology and innovations in our space. We talked earlier over coffee that where I'm certainly old enough to remember paper-based HR. Yeah. And then we had spreadsheet tracking, we had HR information systems, and I think most orgs are on their third learning management system or LXP now. A lot's not changed. As we've freed up the time for those business partners, they filled that time with other things. Yeah. We're just about to face possibly the biggest revolution in the way that we do things and what we do. How do we avoid those mistakes in the past, where the HRS, do we work for the system? Does the system work for us?
Well, I think that's true across the world of work, isn't it? The danger is, I sometimes describe it as you concrete over the cow paths. Right. Okay, so in other words, I haven't really understood all the process. What I've done is just put more automation in on the same process. Fundamentally, what we have to do is step back and say, well, what are we doing? And how do we reinvent these processes so that we understand the outcome and how to get there in a better way, using technology to enable that, but also to free us up. I mean, I think just looking at the world of work more broadly, I mean, we can all see that your point about doing lots of things just for the sake of doing them is not just about HR. It's true in so many aspects of the work that we do today. And then ironically, on top of that, all the signs are that stress at work is growing. The mental health has become much more central. I mean, interesting to me that over the last couple of years of coming here, that more and more people are talking about mental health, younger people, but not just younger people. No. They're talking about stress at work. And these things are unfortunately pretty universal. So we need to reinvent some of this stuff, not just, as I say, automate what we're already doing. And by doing that, we deliver better outcomes. We're more not just efficient, but we're more effective. And also what I think I see a lot of HR people talking about is if we can automate more of these administrative and transactional things, then that gives us more room and space to operate in this much more strategic, value-adding, and frankly more exciting space for HR to occupy, and shaping the future of organizations and jobs and understanding skills and capabilities. All of those things which will drive real value for the profession and make sure that we are absolutely at the heart of the business agenda, which is where I believe we need to be. So that's how I view that. But that then says we have agency on that. This is a lot up to us, how we come together as a profession, how we share our ideas, how we invest in ourselves, how we bring different people into the profession to help us. And to your point about, okay, so if I'm going out to recruit, say, data analysts and data scientists or more people with understanding of AI and bring them into the profession, then we should start with, well, what are we trying to achieve? I mean,
completely. What's the why of this?
What's the why? I mean, if I'm an HR leader, I shouldn't worry about, I don't understand everything the data scientist does or the AI person. No, but what outcome have I trying to achieve? And then give them the challenge and the brief to say, how can you help me understand? So with the data scientist today, it's so much about give me the insights. You know, I talked about evidence-based of what we do, and we have not been good enough at that as a profession. So we need the stronger evidence. We need to use the data that we have. And after all, part of the challenge of HR is we do sit on mountains of stuff, which doesn't always align, and we sometimes argue with finance over silly things like what the headcount is, partly because these numbers change a lot. You know, there's
when did we stop the clock? But
yeah,
absolutely. And to your point earlier about so much of our space being qualitative, that's one area that we've seen the data guys being able to bring in massive value.
Yes, they can.
$50 of server space and 24 hours, and you've got massive insight, qualitative, sentiment-based insight from your organization.
And we need that. And then we need AI to help us, and it really can in this sort of analytics space, to make these correlations. So what is the correlation between some of the behavioral and qualitative stuff and some of the hard-edged business outcomes? And how do we find the patterns in these mountains of data that we have? And there's the 4 V's of data that's talked about, like volume, variety, velocity, and veracity. So in HR, we have tons of it, a lot of volume, a lot of variety, lots of different sources of it. It's changing. Velocity means it's just changing quite regularly. And then veracity, we're not always sure what's true and what's not.
Sure.
AI and data analytics can help us with that. And that is really exciting. But we need to lean into that whole space and saying, all right, like any function, we should be built on a good basis of evidence. In order to understand the outcomes, what are we measuring? And some of that could be qualitative as much as quantitative, so that we are helping to drive those outcomes for the business. And another thing I would add, which I think should give us all hope, is that I talk an awful lot to other stakeholders in businesses too, not just business leaders, but financial stakeholders, shareholders, long-term investors in business. And they are increasingly understanding that the things that we care about in the profession are critical dimensions of a long-term sustainability for any organization. So they are asking for more metrics and understanding on workforce. What's going on? How much are you investing in the skills of your workforce? What is happening today, and it's always been true, is that when businesses are under financial pressure, they tend to cut back on training. Now, that comes back to one of the points we talked about earlier, is that we as a profession not always been clear enough on what is the outcome of learning and be able to point to that. But the fact remains is that a lot of the things that we would say are important to invest in people for the future, to retain them, to engage them, to make sure they have the right skills, tend to get cut back in times of hardship.
Short-term versus
medium and long-term. And that is a perpetual challenge. Now, the long-term investors should be interested in the long-term. And they are. And they recognize that a lot of the things that we measure through the finance function, financial reports, they're all backward-looking measures.
Completely historical measures.
And so I can tell you with great precision how my last quarter compared to the quarter before. But can I tell as an investor what you're doing to build for the future? And businesses that are investing in their people and their skills and their capabilities are investing for the future. So that should give us hope too, that it's not just us making these arguments. We've said that business leaders are paying more attention to these ideas, but so are other stakeholders, investors, but I would add other stakeholders to the list, such as future employees. Future employees are looking for organizations that will invest in them, that engage them effectively, that give them a good work experience, and all those things that we know make healthy organizations.
And nowhere more so than this region.
Absolutely.
We've got young people coming into each of these workforces, and they're making the choices based on what they see around that. They have choices. They can go in different places. And we're not, that's one big advantage we have. And I think a way that the CIPD might be coming here to learn from best practices in these coming decades, because the long-term view is nowhere is it stronger than here. We're building things for generations, not for decades, not for years. And the government views the big organizations, they're generationally built to exactly your point. Now, they want help to do it better. And I think we're in a great place to
I think, as you said, Andrew, to bring it to this region, I mean, so we've already explored, it's growing at a great rate. I think, we had a really interesting conversation yesterday amongst a group of HR leaders, and some have come from Europe and relocated here, and a recognition that the past can slow you down. I mean, the reality of Europe with its long historical past is some of that holds us back. We also have an aging population. So if you take just those two examples,
excluding us, obviously,
yeah,
but
obviously,
other people,
present company excluded. If you take those two examples, the things that this region of the world benefit from, one is a much younger demographic. So all that energy and enthusiasm about shaping the future,
and great education,
and absolutely linked to great education. They're also less tied by the past. They can innovate and think, and they are thinking. I mean, as we said earlier, I mean, the fact that the Sheikh here and the leaders of in the UAE had this long-term vision, which they continue to sustain, says that businesses then lock on to that same long-term thinking, as does the educational system. And what I think really exciting, you talked about what we can learn from each other. We can absolutely learn from the more established economies, or the older economies of the world, from what's happening in the new world as well. And we should. Because we should see how those countries are thinking more long-term, investing in the future, investing in education in ways that I think we are struggling in many parts of the old world, as it were, to replicate.
And I think we have thousands of people going through the qualification route here. I think one critique is the UK-centric focus of that. In some areas, they come in and go, look, we're already ahead of this. Look what we're doing. It's already beyond this.
Exactly.
And congratulations. Because those are conversations we keep having, and we'll get them in.
Yeah,
time is against us, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
time is against us.
There's so many interesting things to talk about, but as I said, my thought for everybody is this is a really important time. I mean, I've used the phrase we're a bit of an inflection point. I think many others have, and it's driven by technology is a major driver of that, but so is social change. So are some of the challenges we see around economies. So are the shifts in geopolitical thinking, which is creating all sorts of strange dynamics in some senses, having moved from a world which we explored at the beginning of the conversation, which is increasingly globalized. And we're feeling that, I've described for a number of years now, it feels like the handbrake's coming on some of that, and even reversing in some ways. But this part of the world, I think, has immense opportunity. It has, it's seeing this growth. It has some of this vision. I'm seeing great innovation, great applications of technology, and the role for the profession for the future, which, as I said, I think is really exciting. And I think we should all advocate for the profession, support what we're doing, challenge ourselves, make sure we're investing in ourselves and building professional competence, which ultimately gives us, as I said before, the confidence, the credibility, and the capability in order to be at the heart of business and driving, ultimately what we have to focus on in terms of the longer term, which is a better world of work, which is fairer, which is more inclusive, which is better for our well-being, which is more flexible. Because, goodness knows how hard we're all been working through our careers. And as you rightly said, the younger generation here, but everywhere, is looking for much more of that work-life integration and that flexibility to work. And we're seeing that. I mean, COVID accelerated a lot of those things. And I really do believe that in the future, we'll see a world of work that accommodates all those different ideas, gives people different opportunities, supports the balance of their lives at different times in their lives, and creates a world that is not just about one model and one size fits all, which we've, I think, long moved away from, but allows us to innovate and create in the context of our own environment. So another quick example of that is we've so long talked about best practice, and that became a bit of a crutch for the profession. If you're not confident, then I'll just do what everybody else is doing, and that's best practice, whether it fits your context or not. So I've long talked about forget best practice. What you need to understand is best fit.
Wonderful.
What's your context? How can you apply some of the different models that you're seeing, but do it in your context and do it in a way that you can work with the business to explain why this is important and what outcome it's driving. And none of those things are beyond our reach. I think
Far from it. We heard that just this week from Abu Dhabi government to build their own best practice, to build what's right for them, let other people come and map them. And that sentiment, they're proud of it. They're like, yes, we will be informed by everything else that's going on, but we're not going to copy and paste any of that because nobody has got our situation, our circumstances. So that move away from I must see it working somewhere else before I do it is the end of it.
But it's a confidence thing, isn't it? I mean, innovation comes from confidence and ability to take measured and calculated risks. It doesn't come from just doing the same thing that we've always done.
Absolutely.
And we must move on from a lot of the things that we've always done.
Peter, I scribbled pages of notes to do a summary. You've just given a better summary than I could possibly imagine. I always finish with one question, and that should be, what should I have asked you that I haven't?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? I think we've given it a pretty good airing across many things. I mean, I've been very fortunate in my career to have experienced a lot of different things and worked in many different areas of business and businesses around the world. I've talked to young people in different countries and seen the emergence of what people talk about Generation Y, the first sort of global generation. And perhaps we haven't talked about so much of some of those generational things. But actually, what I've learned through all of that is a lot of things we talked about, that we can all learn from each other. There is no right answer to all the things we're trying to do. We should have the courage to innovate and try different things. That's where progress comes from. We should have pride in our profession, but we've got to, as I said, invest in ourselves. And I think when people talk about, the younger generation want things like more flexibility and they want purpose in what they're doing, well, don't we all?
Yeah, I don't think that's unique.
That's not unique to them. Now, just because our generation, we kind of rocked up and worked and did what we were told, did not make that right. And we do need to listen to different voices across our organizations and understand the purpose of what we're doing. We talked about purpose in terms of business outcome, but it's broader than that, isn't it? The younger generations in particular, perhaps more than our generation don't just talk about, well, if the outcome of work is just to create more profit for my shareholders, but what's that serving in terms of making the world a better place?
Absolutely.
So these ideas, when I said investors are looking for other things, this idea of multi-stakeholder capitalism, it's not just about the financial shareholder, it's about our communities of which we are part. It's about our customers, about our suppliers, about our employees, and it's about the environment. And all of those things coming together to create a sense of purpose of why businesses exist. And I wrote a book on all of this a few years ago called The New World of Work. One of the things I thought about was business has often thought of itself as apart from society.
Right.
And indeed, I go back to people like Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning American economist, who in the 1970s said that the sole purpose of business, certainly commercial business, was to make money for its shareholders. And that did drive an awful lot of thinking for the next 3, 4, 5 decades.
Absolutely.
I think we've moved, of course you have to worry about those things, but for business to see itself, it's not apart from society. Sorry, I phrased that slightly wrong in the first place. Not apart from society, but a part of society. Business is part of society and should be there also to drive positive societal change.
And in this region, incredibly so.
Yes.
Incredibly so. As that balance between private and public is being framed and sectored.
Yeah.
We are not just here to make rich people richer.
Yes.
The most affluent in these societies are building countries.
Yes,
They're not trying to create more money. So people feel the need to be part of that purpose.
Yeah.
Peter, absolute pleasure. Thank you for your insights. Will you still talk to us when you're...
Without a shadow of a doubt. As I said, retirement for me does not mean hanging out my boots and lying at a beach or something. I'm one of these people that's pretty driven, but I'm driven by a sense of purpose myself. And
Absolutely.
I've always had that as a central value. And all the things we've explored and talked about, I want to continue to try to challenge a bit and maybe help to advocate for the profession, as I said at the beginning. So I will certainly be very active. I look forward to continuing to come to the region, engaging in conversations like this for sure, for many years to come, I hope.
Well, I think that's quite a key role, right?
Yeah.
I think we need strong critique. We need that experience to come back to it. So, on behalf of all the members in this region, thank you for your support over these last 14 years. Thank you for your contribution. And I hope that you do keep speaking to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.